at this point to go live now to hear from House Republican leadership and Republicans from the Joint Economic Committee. Today they're releasing a new study on how federal spending affects the deficit and the national economy. This is just getting underway.
Our majority will be about jobs and the economy. But we had some tough things to do in order to demonstrate results. And what we said first is we have got to reduce the growth of government and bring our fiscal house into order in order for the private sector to grow. And that's exactly what Kevin's report that he'll talk about says. Less government spending means more private sector jobs, period. And as you know, Kevin Brady was the author, if you will, of the chart, the now famous chart of Obamacare. And it was his work in the Joint Economic Committee that produced that's so stuck in the minds of so many Americans about the complexity and really the monstrosity of the Obamacare bill. So with that, I want to turn it over to the Majority Whip, Kevin McCarthy.
Thank you. I'm the other Kevin. But I will tell you, the work that Kevin Brady and the committee has just done is the right time and the right facts. He studied 4 decades, 107 countries, 26 of them lower their deficit. And what happens? You don't wait 4 decades to get the job growth. It comes right away. So America is at a crossroads. There's different ways to go about doing it. But this study also shows if you raise taxes, it's not a way to end a crisis. If you cut government debt, the private sector grows. Jobs grow. So I want you to take one moment, and I want you to imagine. Imagine the potential for all Americans if they were freed of the burden of the debt that we have before us. Now that's the path we're on. So as Republicans stated out in their pledge, they're here to grow jobs and cut government spending. And Kevin Brady and Joint Economics have just found out by the facts to everybody else that is actually what works. It's proven, and that's the path we're on. I can't thank Kevin enough for the work they've done.
I serve in the Ways and Means Committee on the Select Revenue Subcommittee, and you can imagine there's 2 basic pathways to try to close a budget gap. One is to raise taxes, and the other is to cut spending. What the Joint Economic Commission has demonstrated is a global perspective and a historical perspective that sets out a pathway that's straightforward. It's not easy, but it's clear. And if the American public joins with us, House Republicans, and we're reflecting their values in this debate, what we're doing is creating a pathway for prosperity. And there's an urgency to this, not just in the short term, but ultimately in the long term. And with that, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady.
Peter, thank you to Leader Cantor and Whip McCarthy. Thank you for being here today. Let me give some brief remarks and walk you through this new study today. For the past 2 years, the American people have been told the only way for a path forward to economic recovery was more federal spending that drove up federal debt. And the White House and Washington Democrats, unfortunately, continue to cling to this failed economic model, refusing to listen to voices of respected mainstream economists here in the United States. The job gap between their promises and the results is significant and disappointing. After throwing nearly $5 trillion in fiscal and monetary stimulus at the economy, there are actually 2 million fewer jobs today than when the stimulus began. The White House promised our unemployment rate would be down to 6.9% by now. And as for total jobs in America today, the White House fell short of their promises by 7 million American workers. The government spending is the answer crowd had their chance to jumpstart the economy. They failed. It's time for a proven approach. Republicans in Congress are determined to remove barriers to new jobs by tackling America's dangerous deficits and removing the resulting uncertainty that deters business from hiring new workers. There's nearly $2 trillion of capital sidelined in America. Republicans are determined to bring that capital back to the economy to create jobs as a result. Let me run through a couple charts here, if I may. This chart, we tracked the last 40 years in America, our economy and spending. This first chart shows private sector jobs increases, the jobs along Main Street, and federal government or business investment. What it shows is a direct correlation. When companies large and small buy new buildings, new equipment, new software, private sector jobs grow. Look at the next slide. Let's go back to. Perfect. And here you'll see the blue line, which is federal government spending the last 40 years. The red line is job creation. If you track job growth, and if you track federal government spending, you'll realize there is no correlation. In fact, as federal spending grows, jobs along Main Street shrink. That's because without private investment, you don't have the jobs that go with it. There is no substitute for private business investment, not federal spending, not rebates, not even shovel-ready projects. The new report we unveiled today is entitled Spend Less, Owe Less, Grow the Economy. It surveys empirical, mainstream, peer-reviewed economic studies over the past 4 decades, examining our global competitors with high debt. It provides clear and convincing evidence that countries that reduce their government debt through spending cuts boost the economic growth and job creation in the short term. Respected economists found a number of instances from 1970 to 2007 where many of our U.S. competitors successfully reduced their debt to GDP ratio predominantly or entirely by savings through spending cuts. And they grew their economy at the same time. Canada, our neighboring Canada, shrank total government spending by 12 percentage points starting in 1994. They boosted their economy from an anemic less than 1% to a robust 3.4% average over the next 12 years. Sweden's economy was actually shrinking in the early 1990s. After reducing Swedish government spending by 11 percentage points of their GDP, Sweden's negative growth economy revived to an average of 3.5% annually. New Zealand did exactly the same. But they are not alone, and that's the point of this study. Economists found 26 episodes in 9 developed economies where reducing debt through spending cuts provide a large boost to economic growth in the first 3 years after this reduction began. And perhaps the most important finding is this. And while most economists agree that reducing federal spending increases economic growth in the long term, what this study found is that reducing federal spending through spending cuts boosts the economy in the short term as well. So what spurred the growth when countries reduced their debt? 2 things. Businesses no longer expected the government to levy large tax increases in the future to pay for this excessive spending. So businesses did what they do. They stepped up their investment in buildings, equipment, and software. And as we've shown before in America, private investment creates jobs. Secondly, households, no longer facing higher taxes, had higher expectations for permanent disposable income. So they became more confident, and they bought bigger ticket items because that uncertainty about higher taxes went away as well. So by removing the uncertainty for both businesses and households, countries saw higher economic growth. And to maximize, there's a point, too, in this study that I thought was fascinating. To maximize the economic boost in the short term and to maximize the jobs you create, report found that spending reductions must be large, credible, and difficult to reverse once made. And those are important points. Those cuts had to be credible, they had to be significant, they had to be difficult to reverse in the future. The savings that produced the greatest economic growth included right-sizing the government workforce and its compensation, eliminating duplicative agencies and programs, eliminating transfer payments, that is subsidies to businesses, and reforming and reducing transfer payments to individuals. And within this study, what became clear as well is countries that tackled entitlement reform and made these changes boosted their economy. The conclusion I'd like to make is that delaying these spending cuts are risky to the U.S. economy. President Obama and congressional Democrats have emphasized the risk of reducing now America's deficits and debt, but they ignore the risk of delay. As this mainstream study shows, ample real-life data proves there are significant economic growth and job creation benefits that come from reducing spending and reforming entitled programs to restore their sustainability for future generations. For America's economic future, it's time for a proven path forward and to grow our economy. It's time for Washington to spend less and owe less as a nation.
Questions? We do have a vote on, so yes.
Eliminating transfer payments to business. Do you want to be specific about what policies Republicans support that might do that?
In this study, economists identified different subsidies throughout the world. The equivalent of ours would be an Amtrak subsidy, an ethanol subsidy. There are a range of them. To my knowledge, the Republican conference is looking at the whole range of those items. But, Leader?
Yeah, I mean, listen, this goes back to the underlying premise. You can't come to Washington, wave a magic wand, spend taxpayer dollars, and expect there to be growth. Again, Kevin's report points out that those who subscribe to that theory had their day, and clearly the results were not there. Yes, sir.
Mr. Leader, as I read the report, it's hedging a little bit more than you're presenting. It says here, in some cases, the non-PAP effects may be strong enough to make fiscal consolidation programs expansionary in the short term as well as the long term. So you're not guaranteeing job growth from these cuts, are you?
You can't. If you look at 107 countries, they are different. It didn't work in all cases. What we identified, or what the economists identified, was the winning formula, how you boost jobs by reducing your debt. In fact, they gave us a very good model to follow as we go forward as well.
Yes.
Today, Minority Reporter said that they are waiting now for a counter offer from you. I know yesterday you said you were waiting for an offer from them. Now they say they're waiting for an offer from you. Can you respond to that?
Sure. It's just time for the games to stop. I mean, we are where the American people are. We want to resolve the spending question for the remainder of this year as quickly as we can. Again, let's not forget the reason why we are here is that the majority of last Congress was unable to pass any spending bill other than hang on to current rates. And I'm hopeful that we can see that this is the last stopgap measure and that we can come to some resolution to cut spending so we can begin to facilitate an environment, as the report indicates, for job growth. Yes?
Senator Domenici was testifying for the Budget Committee today, and he made the point that he was concerned Republicans are focusing too much on discretionary spending, particularly non-defense. And he said it actually is distracting from the larger challenge of getting entitlements under control and also overhauling.
First of all, let's say this. If we can't cut some discretionary spending, how do we expect to go about the even more difficult issues of the mandatory spending and the entitlement spending? And so what we're doing here is we're actually delivering on the promise that we made. We're going to change the culture in Washington. Can you imagine what the discussion was a year ago? We're actually discussing how much to cut now. So again, it is taking us, a deliberate plan and effort to go about cutting spending, everywhere in this town. We all know the facts. We're borrowing nearly 40 cents out of every dollar that is being spent. That is unsustainable. Families can't do that. Businesses can't do that. The government can't do that. So again, I would say that, yes, we're going to deal with all of it. We've said when our budget comes forward out of the Budget Committee and Chairman Ryan within the next month, you're going to see where Republicans stand, and it's going to be to reform entitlements. Our bottom line is we're going to protect today's seniors and those nearing retirement. But for the rest of us, 54 and under, we're going to come to grips with the fact that if we want those programs to be around, they're going to look a lot different. Yes, sir.
Are you able to make any projections about job growth from cutting spending? How many jobs will be created?
Well, again, I think that is the trap that the administration and the Democrats fell into last Congress to ensure that that they would demonstrate their government spending would produce X number of jobs. We don't believe that you necessarily can wave a magic wand in Washington and create jobs. What the study indicates that the trends say is if governments get their fiscal house in order, there is a much better environment for growth and job creation.
We do know that the Keynesian view of the stimulus didn't work, and that cost us $1 trillion.
Thank you very much.